Okay, students, hopefully you can hear me well enough, and I'll try to fix the audio if I can later. Um, so since I'm not feeling so well today, this is how we're having class, and I'm going to use a PowerPoint for you. Um, I don't know how long I'll talk for, but I'll try. Okay, today is Democracy in America Day, which is a great day. Um, because Tocqueville's awesome, and we're doing Tocqueville majority tyranny, Tocqueville and industrial aristocracy, and the American philosophical method. So we've talked about him. You probably know about him. He comes from an aristocratic family. He's commenting on like the prison system. He wants to investigate that. That's why he's here. But he ends up reflecting on democracy. He sees democracy as this form of politics that is caught between freedom and equality. He thinks freedom and equality are always in tension. They'll always bump up against each other. Now, the best way to read Democracy in America is as a sort of loyal opposition. Tocqueville thinks that democracy is the wave of the future. He also thinks it's the most metaphysically just. He actually says at one point that after the incarnation, when God becomes man, that is what he calls the end of the rule of masters, meaning we can't make these arbitrary hierarchical distinctions between us. Equality is not just the way forward in terms of what people want. It's also metaphysically true. I'll walk you through some Tocquevillian paradoxes. We become free to be equal, but the more equal we are, the less free we are. Liberal individualism is meant to protect us from government, but the more individualistic we are, the more we depend on the government. People believe a tyrant is one person, but a majority can also be tyrannical. So how do these two up here work, right? The more equal we become, he basically thinks we get rid of the sources of what make us distinct. And as we get rid of those sources, we don't have a ton to draw from. But whatever it is that we see everyone else doing, the same when it comes to liberal individualism, we think in getting rid of other forms of, I guess you might say, social power, that we are becoming individuals. What happens is it just becomes the individual and the state. There's no secondary institutions. And of course, the individual cannot stand against the state. He thinks there are three aspects of equality: equality under the law, equality of wealth, and equality of minds and opinions. And it's the equality of minds and opinions that bothers him the most. Even though democracy is more just, he says, it poses a certain kind of tyranny. And that tyranny is the tyranny of the majority. Because the essence of democracy is the rule of the majority. He thinks that really the whole of the government is contained in the legislature. You'll notice he's like medicine. He thinks that's where we have to fear power overstepping itself. Laws are made in favor of the majority in the legislature, and the counterweight of the executive branch is naturally weak. And I'd ask you if you think that's true nowadays. He points out that the check of the judiciary is weak too. In some places, it's even elected. And even if it's not elected, it's subject to the legislature for approval. Okay, so how does this equality problem work? The best way to think about it actually is to start in terms of the imagination. This is really Montesquieu in a lot of ways. This is really French too. In the aristocratic imagination, like if you inhabit an aristocratic society, you're going to aspire to be an aristocrat, but you know you're quite different from it. Social roles and identity are extremely important and well defined, and you can't really strive out of your class. But when you think about yourself and the good things about yourself, you probably think about it in aristocratic language and some version of whatever it is the aristocracy sees itself as doing and representing. And here, a famous case would be the way that in Pericles' funeral oration, he takes basically the Homeric kings and their virtues, and he makes them the virtues of every individual Athenian democrat who dies for the dream of Athens. And so it is a democratization of aristocratic virtue. Even Tocqueville says in any place where aristocracy lingers, the imagination stays there. Democratic imagination in America, we rule by the majority. And so what does everyone aspire to be? They aspire to be a part of the majority. Well, what defines the majority but the opinion of the majority? You could see how that's kind of contentless. This means that in democratic society, there's no check on the majority and the individual may be crushed underneath it. The danger of majority tyranny on thought is that it can reach deeds and will, so we're not even free in our own mind. So here's what Tocqueville thinks. When we're talking about the tyranny of the majority, he thinks what happens is people don't want to step out of line. They don't want to be the raised nail that gets hit by the hammer. And what that means is that the hammer is going to drop on whoever's different. And so we have a lot of incentive not to think independently and freely. We'll ask ourselves when we have an idea, is this what other people are thinking? Does this seem like it's in the range of the norm? He sees this as the death of creativity, art, and noble aspirations. So nobody's making you not do these things. Nobody's making you not step out of line. It's not like a government is being tyrannical and stopping you. What's stopping you is your own self-censoring, but this is a type of unfreedom. This is his point when he says the violence of the majority is spiritualized rather than physical. Okay, nobody is putting you in chains over it. You are letting the chains slip over yourself. A lack of desire to question the majority or to aspire to be different from it in more than a superficial way is kind of how I talk about this. Our philosophical method reflects this issue. You guys may know Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. He says all of us are basically Cartesians without knowing it. Well, what does he mean by that? To understand that we really have to think in terms of opposites. So what are we not in our philosophical method? And that's really how you'll piece together what he means. The thing about Descartes, when he says, I think therefore I am, what he means is that the source of power and legitimacy and truth for him at base is himself and his subjectivity. That becomes put in the place of objectivity for rationality. And that's a big shift. That's a modern shift. It's very different from what you'll find in the ancient world and what you find in the medieval world. Even though there are actually parts of Augustine's, I think it's on the Trinity, that sound a bit like this, it's situated really differently and it's fleshed out a lot more. So remember I told you he uses kind of like negative reasoning here to describe what it is we are. So what do we do if we're these Cartesians? To escape from the spirit of system, from the yoke of habits, from family maxims, from class opinions, and up to a certain point from national prejudices, to take tradition only as information and current facts only as a useful study for doing otherwise and better, to seek the reason for things by themselves and in themselves alone, to strive for results without letting themselves be chained to the means, and to see through the form to the foundation. In our minds, our perspective as Cartesians, we attack everything ancient because we think that it's only habit that's kept it around, and we don't stop and think that maybe it's wisdom that's made it hang around. Once we do that, we have a vacuum opened up in our intellectual sources, and that vacuum becomes filled by majority opinion. The bond between generations is broken for the same reason. Again, previous generations are seen as just old, not having anything to say to us. This bond being broken leads to both loneliness and a lack of identity because we can't understand ourselves in terms of what came before and is in continuity with what came before. And it also leads to a lack of wisdom. When traditions get destroyed as being thoughtless and useless, what happens is we become pretty unmoored. And this method takes away the fullness of our life, but it also doesn't give us a language for recognizing what we're missing. This factor, especially of our Cartesian method, leads to the majority opinion, which I already explained, we quickly adopt, having a lot of homogeneity and a lack of energy. Kind of by definition, we're not going to be able to recognize greatness in others because greatness is normally an outlier. We see outlier things as useless or a threat. We will be suspicious of valid leadership qualities, therefore, and we also think, along with Descartes, because we have this really narrow understanding of reason, that if something cannot be explained in this sort of modern objectivist way, it can't be believed. But this places another limit on our imaginations and what we aspire to. What happens to a culture when there isn't greatness? Well, we have greatness still, but the greatness we have perhaps is not so great. The only place you see outliers is in the industrial elite. Democracy favors the development of industry because the need for cheap goods increases. Here he has a quote: while the worker applies his intelligence to the study of a single detail, the master casts his sight every day over a broader whole, and his mind expands in proportion as that of the worker contracts. So basically, the people who are running the show, they get to use their mind in flexible and creative ways, but their entire mission is sort of built on subjugating the common worker to very narrow, concentrated factory work. The master has an empire built off of human desires, and he has to kind of increase human desire to increase his empire, even if that's not good for the polity, because that's how he makes money. I think that everything considered, the manufacturing aristocracy that we see arising before our eyes is one of the harshest that has appeared on the earth, but at the same time, it is one of the most limited and least dangerous, Tocqueville opines. Nonetheless, it is in this direction that the friends of democracy must with anxiety constantly turn their attention. For if permanent inequality of conditions and aristocracy ever penetrate the world again, you can predict they will come in through this door. Okay, that's it.